Hi, everyone. Welcome to our Blockchain4Good session on decentralized solutions for transparent and sustainable supply chains. I'm Razali, founder of Sustainable ADA and Impact Web3. We work to close the sustainability finance gap, help changemakers, NGOs, and startups with education and resources to understand and leverage technology that solves real-world problems. Currently, we're working with Amnesty International to explore use cases with DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, and human rights tokens for governance and more. And through that lens, given the current climate, and as an activist that has been advocating for transparent supply chains for decades, it's a real honor and privilege to be moderating this panel alongside changemakers today. And today, we are living in an increasingly interconnected and interdependent world. At the same time, there are human-made crises and divisions unraveling and getting worse by the minute, with countless lives being lost and millions suffering from preventable catastrophes. War in Sudan, Palestine, Yemen, DRC, Congo, and Ukraine. Genocide, famine, food and water insecurity, funding cuts, unstable access to raw materials, geopolitical tensions, inflation, cost of living crises with rising prices for food and energy, and climate breakdown. And supply chains are at the center of all of it, with governance, politics, and human decisions behind them all. How our systems are powered and how we power and fuel our lives are largely dependent on critical resources that are often sourced far away from our homes, where human rights abuses and environmental devastation is out of our sight. We live in a system largely driven to internalize profits and externalize costs onto society and the environment. Our phones, laptops, electrical devices, our food, medicine, and vaccines all depend on global trust networks. The system inequities and status quo depend and thrive on insecurity, silence, and a lack of transparency. Regulation and standards are evolving globally to push the needle in tackling greenwashing and ensuring companies and stakeholders act responsibly, with various mandatory reporting requirements and product passports. But in order to drive action towards equitable outcomes and not just tick box exercises and legal compliance, we need to understand the problems fully at scale and at the local level. And we need courageous, multi-stakeholder, and multi-sectoral collaborative action, with data-driven evidence coming from industry pioneers who are on the front lines of innovation for real-world impact. But our digital lives are not neutral. They are wired through conflict, inequality, and silence. Colleagues in the movement that gave us the term blood diamonds have shared with me that they saw blockchain as a false dawn, that it can't solve supply chains' inherent problems. AI, blockchain, and crypto aren't a miracle fix, but they can be and are powerful tools. Blockchain is a tool that can help make supply chains more transparent, traceable, and cost-effective if it is adopted for such purposes. And today, we're going beyond buzzwords. We're digging into what's actually working, what's hard, and where the real opportunities are. This is about truth, responsibility, and justice. And I'm grateful to be joined by three inspiring people who are truly leading in this critical space. Mark Kaplan, Chief Sustainability Officer at WholeChain. He's been deep in traceability work for years, helping restore the reputation of the seafood industry, and is on a mission to enable transparency in global supply chains, educating and advocating for industry standards. Dan Friedman, CEO of Zengate Global, has been focused on unlocking fair market access for small producers and rural communities, and driving for positive industry change, working alongside Sri Lankan tea farmers and Argentinian lithium mines, to give a few examples. And last but not least, Ella Cullen, co-founder and CMO at MindSpider, has been driving blockchain solutions for responsible sourcing, tackling the complex web of critical mineral markets, and redefining an opaque supply chain. Now, I'd love for us to jump into our discussion today, and we have about 25 minutes and then ideally some time at the end for a Q&A from the audience. But to set the scene, can each of you take a minute to tell our audience about what your organizations are doing and how you're using decentralized tech to respond to today's supply chain challenges and disruptions? It could be around transparency, event-based traceability, or ethical sourcing. Perhaps we could start with Ella. Thank you.
Sure, happy to do so. Thank you, Raz. Yeah, so we've been around since 2018. We came about because of the Dodd-Frank Act, basically putting somewhat of an embargo on sourcing minerals from the DRC. And at the time we said, hey, there must be a better way to do it. And let's look at blockchain technology as a way in which we can track supply chains more efficiently and basically ensure responsible sourcing rather than just creating this embargo on minerals from a certain country. I think this is also obviously going to be coming into play a lot with tariffs, but probably we'll dive into that a bit more further on. So we were really fortunate back in 2018 to start working with Google, Volkswagen, and Minsua. Minsua is still our biggest client today, actually. And we, of course, encountered a ton of challenges. I'm excited to talk to Dan and Mark about their challenges and working in supply chains because they're a pain in the ass, to be completely honest. And mapping suppliers, all of these, verifying the data. It was a struggle from the start. And I think blockchain was an incredible tool, and I'm really glad we adopted it. But we also evolved our blockchain many iterations over, removed tokens, for instance, because companies like Google didn't know how to hold them. So there's been many iterations in the blockchain. I would say around 3 years ago, we also started focusing on batteries. So now we track battery metals and work with a lot of automotive companies like Renault and Ford to help them understand and comply with battery regulation, particularly in the EU. So that's kind of the next frontier where we see the market going for responsible and critical mineral traceability. But yeah, I'll leave it at that and we can touch on more of those points soon, I hope.
Thank you, Ella. Just going clockwise, Dan.
Thanks, Raz. Yeah, I guess as Ella eloquently put it, what supply chains are a pain, I guess you could say. There's always something that can be done better. It's never perfect. And it's never meant to be, because it's all about people and it's about changing environments. It's about changing economies and the emerging economies. And so really, the work that I've done in the past 10 years has been in emerging economies, starting with the launch of Cardano, which I was a part of. And after we launched Cardano, most of the work that I did was in emerging economies: Eastern Europe, Southeast Asia, South Asia. Cardano also did quite a bit of work in Africa and still does a bit of work in Africa. There are many different initiatives. And so that's where most impact is made, is in developing economies. Of course, developed economies, of course, they also have place for impact, but it's the developing economies where you can have the most impact. That's my personal view. And that's where blockchain tech, I believe, has the best fit right now. And so this is why when we started Zengate, I stuck to those guns, to the developing economies, and specifically to commodities, because commodities are what a lot of these economies produce, whether they be soft commodities like tea, like grains, or minables like gold, silver, and lithium. A lot of these economies are commodity based and commodity driven. And quite a bit of time, what happens is, there's a lot of disparity that goes through the entire value chain, starting at the source and continuing on from, aggregators, gatekeepers, access to markets, all these different things. It's not about really, leveling playing fields. It's about what we call opportunity inclusion. We believe that the lack of access excludes people out of opportunity, and opportunity is what we want to bring to them. And so this is why we started with the Palmyra platform, which is our tokenization and traceability platform that is tailored for empowering MSMEs, and giving them market access, giving them the tooling and the digitization that they lack and they need, and transparency and through traceability, through authentication, and of course tools for compliance. which are very much needed for a lot of these developing economies to be able to access larger markets like the EU, like the US. And so that's really what it's all been about. It's been about empowering, as Raz said, empowering developing economies and producers in developing economies, whether it be tea producers in Sri Lanka, which was our initial jurisdiction, to ethical lithium mining in Argentina, to basically right now, for example, my co-founder Sam Lambert is in Zambia and working with honey producers.
If I may,
And
Dan,
so,
just to jump in on there, we're going to have
of
some
course,
time to dive into the real world examples a bit later on.
of
And
course.
it's fantastic that you're teasing the audience with the amazing work your team have been doing. Mark, if you may, thank you.
Sure, no problem. Mark Kaplan, Chief Sustainability Officer of FullChain. We started the company actually based on previous experience that we had. Myself and my co-founder and CEO, Jason Berryhill, we come from the mobile technology industry. We worked in like with the AT&Ts of the world for years. Our real unlock came when we were contracted as U.S. Department of State contractors out in Indonesia working with small scale fishers. When we saw that just the practices at the first mile of supply chains, then subsequently I worked for Unilever as Global VP of Sustainable Solutions and saw supply chain from that perspective and really thought Unilever does it quite well for a company of their scale. But then we thought, how could we apply a Unilever sustainable living plan approach to business to seafood? Then traceability was our leading point of difference. So what we did, given the, many issues in deploying new technologies that are nascent, we created a seafood company. And then we built our traceability solution within our own customer. And then, 2 years ago, we sold the seafood company. It was doing quite well, better than expected, honestly, not obviously. And then I led the seafood business for the bit. Jason continued on with WholeChain, and now we've both been focused on WholeChain since the last year and a half. But that's how we did it. Now we've reapplied WholeChain from seafood into textiles and beef and soy and so on and so forth. And we do event-based traceability as our method for using blockchain. We hash our records. We don't use it as a database though. And so, yeah, we base the traceability on global standards like GS1 and Global Dialogue on Seafood Traceability. And we're continuing to, we're partnering actually with the UN Global Compact Ocean Stewardship Coalition to create the Better Food Future initiative to continue scaling data standards in different commodity supply chains.
Thank you, Mark. And just for the audience who may not be familiar with some of those acronyms,
absolutely.
What's a GS1?
I was trying to be brief. Excuse the acronym soups. GS1 is the standards body that promulgates the barcode, among other data standards. So rather than trying to reinvent any wheels, we're leveraging existing infrastructure, applying blockchain and different methods for data collection, but the actual data standards themselves are staying consistent.
Perfect. Yeah, I think that's a good moment then to kind of segue into these real world examples, using
Sure.
the standards that are out there. Let's hear from Ella. There's been so much talk about what blockchain could do, negative media attention. Let's talk about what it has done, right? What are the actual positive examples? And given the partners and clients you've worked with, perhaps you could share with us, a real example, a case study where blockchain actually made a difference in the supply chain and in your organization.
Yeah, happy to do so. First up, I just love that, Mark, you created your own seafood company, though. I think the future of companies is going to be building them from the ground up with a data-driven and traceable approach, but that's just a side note. So we work predominantly with clients in Africa and Latin America, also some in other more developed jurisdictions, let's say, and most of it is importing into the EU. So some of our use cases, I would say in Africa, we work a lot with companies looking to do ICGLR, which is the, sorry, not to use acronyms, International Conference of the Great Lakes Region, which is kind of a due diligence standard for mineral sourcing coming from there. So we have two pioneers, one lunar smelter in Rwanda and Woodcross in Uganda. And I've been fortunate enough to visit both of them on site. And these are really companies looking to do things differently to, capture all the data, share all the data from day one. And we found that this form of traceability is much easier to actually enable the upstream, which is obviously the mines, the smelters, the first step of the supply chain, to be responsible and to pioneer that information. And that gives them, access to more investment, access to markets like the EU or the US. And also obviously to comply with regulations like the ones they have to in Africa. So this, for us, we see more and more of these pioneers popping up, and we've worked with both of those at Woodcross for 3 years now, and Luna for almost 5. So we see the effects that traceability has on their business, which is really promising. On the other side, Minsur, the client that I mentioned at the beginning, we started with this pilot program tracking tin from Minsur to Google in the US via Japan. And we actually ended up tracking tin to their Google Pixel phone, so end to end, but very small scale. And you'll see this often with traceability. When they talk about end to end, as in tracking every step of the supply chain, it's often a small manufactured supply chain, because the vastness of real world supply chains is pretty much overwhelming in terms of complexity. So we also then took a step back to how do we scale this without, doing a tiny supply chain trial to prove that we can go end to end. And these days we track 10% of the world's tin from Minsur, going out to around 14 different supply chains, going downstream from them, from the upstream. And we see that these partners really appreciate that they know that they're sourcing from Minsur, that they have the data on. Minsur is world class. We've shot some videos there on like reducing water waste, recycling tailings, a whole bunch of other things. They also really want to distinguish themselves from illegal miners in Madre de Dios, which is one of these illegal areas in Peru. So we're finally seeing the ROI for traceability with these clients. I think that's really exciting because a lot of them started these projects purely with the vision that one day they would be able to make it a business case, and now they finally are.
Thank you, Ella. That's inspiring and encouraging to hear. And I'm sure a lot of that resonates with Mark and Dan on their travels. Dan, perhaps you could share with us as well, given your recent documentary as well that's been released. I don't know if anyone else has seen it. Thanks.
Yeah, well, that was actually that was just meant to be a business trip, and it kind of turned into this what you now call a documentary. So, but actually, what I wanted to touch on was not the lithium operation, but or the work that we're doing in Argentina and LATAM right now with lithium and with minables, and not just lithium. There's other resources that we're working with right now to enable traceability, to enable sustainability in the way these are attained and produced and extracted and exploited. Exploitation meaning the extraction of these minerals and of these minables out of the ground, for those of you who might not know what exploitation means in that context. But what I wanted to kind of touch on was pretty much our very first use case on Palmyra. And so as you mentioned, and as Mark mentioned, as Elle mentioned, it's not just all about blockchain. It's also just about just ironing out logistics of the thing, just how these things, order of operations, because a lot of times this order of operations is screwed up. And so what we did was what we decided from the get-go is that blockchain wasn't going to be the answer; it was going to be part of the answer. And this was in combination with other things. And so our first use case was Sri Lankan Ceylon tea, which is a multi-billion-dollar industry which faces quite a bit of fragmentation, quite a bit of well, exploitation in a negative way, as in gatekeeping and producers being exploited and kind of getting minimum returns on maximum output. And so what we did was we just ironed things out. We established a clear path for logistics. We established a clear path for traceability and auditability of products, starting from the producer and going all the way to the buyer. And then we put that out on our platform, on the Palmyra platform. And so what happened was this gave access and opportunity for access to both producers and to the buyer. And in the end, it gave well, look, without really going deeply into it, and we can later if you want to, making this process more efficient with a combination of Web 2 and Web 3 solutions, which is what we did with Palmyra and Witcher protocol, which is our tokenization and traceability protocol that utilizes blockchain. We were essentially able to increase profits for the producer by something like 50% and reduce costs for the buyer by 40%. So in the end, everybody made out. And this was not because we did something magical. It was just because we cleaned things up and we used blockchain tech and we used common sense processes to do so, and it made a difference. And this is something that can be applied over and over and over again, because really, a lot of times in emerging markets, the problem is convolution. Is that a word, convolution? Things are convoluted. Okay, English is not my first language, so sometimes I screw it up. But you just deconvolute things and they just tend to work. And it just happens that blockchain technology and traceability and tokenization really do help with these issues, really do help with transparency, and really do help in the end with more opportunity inclusion for, in this case, for more financial gain. So yeah, that's essentially it. That's how we made things better, and then we keep making them better with other producers, refining our processes. For example, without dropping too many acronyms, I will drop one. There is a thing called EUDR, the European Union Deforestation Regulation, which is going into effect this year, I believe, because they delayed it. Now it's going into effect. And so what happens is there is a list of soft commodities that are now required to have traceability and auditing to be able to be exported into the EU. And if they don't, and if they actually violate EUDR, they're banned from the EU forever. That is, beyond infinity. And that's not good for business. So what we did was we created part of our suite is actually helping EUDR compliance or be able to achieve EUDR compliance for these MSMEs coming out of emerging markets and going into developed markets like the EU. So again, just clean these things up, right? Gave them the tools, because one of the reasons why they delayed it is because nobody was really ready for it. They had to delay it. So that's what we did. And we used a combination of Web 2, Web 3, and common sense to give the tooling to the producer. And then what they do with it from there is up to them. And many of them will take the opportunity to do so because it just makes sense.
Thanks, Dan. I guess, like they say, money talks, right? And I think if everyone around the table could see that it's working on all of the critical needs, then it's a no-brainer. You brought up regulation, and I think maybe Mark, with your background and your experience in Unilever and the industry's evolution over time, I'd love to hear how you see things currently with the examples of the tech being applied in whole chain.
Yeah, man. Common sense is a magical thing, right? When we did this with the seafood business, very similar experience to Dan, like just work through the supply chain, starting from the source rather than starting from a tier 1 distributor and with the I promise. And you end up paying less for a better product, delivering value to the primary producer and to the end consumer. And then, what we've been looking at with whole chain is we have this firsthand use case, and many end buyers are looking for a very similar result, right? So the middle is oftentimes the one responsible for a lot of the bad press, despite the end visible brands being the ones targeted by the media. And so what we've been able to do is using event-based traceability, not just define the who and where something happened, but what was happening there, and delivering both insights to the enterprises through the supply chain so they can have those informed interventions that Elle and Dan have been talking about, and then also tell the end consumer story, which I can show you a couple of examples in a second. And while there is policy momentum, particularly, and I'll be current in it, particularly from the European Union, where the US has delayed several of its policies for a few years, like the FDA Food Safety Modernization Act that requires full traceability has been delayed until 2028. But really, the market is still demanding that these practices be put in place. So the market is the real driver. Ella made the point that we like to lead with the ROI from whole chain. Again, we have that firsthand experience. I'll show you a couple of examples here. Can you see these? Can you see these on screen? Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
So those are live QR codes that have been on pack or on tuna cans. You can see vanilla and tuna. If you scan those QR codes and enter the lot number, you'll be able to see the story of that specific supply chain. And what it does is it gives the end consumer that level of comfort and confidence that the product that they're buying is actually, like, the claims are actualized, and it gives them more confidence in that brand, that it aligns with their values. So I just leave that there for a second. But we have examples here where we have, similar to Dan's work in bringing small scale producers to market. We worked with small scale producers from South Africa, a woman-owned supply chain there, which is an amazing story now. ICV Tuna and Cape Fish is an amazing company in South Africa. Ocean Experts and Mahi Mahi from Oman. And now we're working with, in the Yucatan state in Mexico, on enabling these types of small scale market access programs, and another one in Argentina in squid. So those are very cool. And then from the data standards perspective, you can see on our YouTube channel the virtual summit with a Tapestry Group, who owns Coach and Kate Spade, WWF, Havere, and Institute of Food Technologists, where we're reapplying the data standard from seafood to deforestation-free beef and leather. And so, it's working in the terms of the scalability is there, the return on investment is there, both from an easing the burden of compliance, like the workflow and paperwork and so forth, but also the efficiencies in the supply chain, and then driving sales velocity.
Thank you, Mark. That's awesome. And hearing from the three of you, I guess it's safe to assume then that everything's out there. The solutions are there. It's working. So I guess my question would then be, why isn't this happening at scale? You know, we've heard, you've mentioned that at some points there's been hurdles, humans are involved, but yeah, I'd love to hear from you what you'd consider are the biggest challenges or blockers in terms of bringing these solutions into the real world for global supply chain systems to be transparent. You know, what's preventing this or stopping it or slowing it down, and how have you all been navigating that? Ella?
Yeah, I think our biggest hurdle to adoption has always been capturing data. So kind of what Dan touched on is the common sense, or actually just a lot of this data is on sheets of paper. It is not even digitalized. So there's a lot of steps in between to even get this data digitalized, then on the blockchain. And now obviously, yeah, we think blockchain is a fantastic tool. It's one of the tools in our toolkit, right? So we're starting to use a lot of AI to help people pull data from their systems and put them in product passports, which is what we use to transport this data along the supply chain. So basically training companies not only on traceability and on regulations and how to think about sourcing, but also how to capture data within their company and package it in a system like ours or like these other gentlemen, you know. So that's a big hurdle. A lot of our business is driven by compliance, which is why we focus a lot on the EU market, which is a really good thing because this kind of transparency is very necessary for the world. Right now, this is all a bit up in the air with the US's movements, right? So we know generally now there's a trend away from compliance, and I think we will see some of or we already are seeing some of the regulations in Europe being postponed. Which is not necessarily a good thing. So that's going to be another challenge, but we're seeing a whole bunch of pioneers, as I explained before, people that want to do this regardless of the outcome, that find it super important to show the efforts that they're making to be responsible, to source responsibly, to communicate that with the downstream consumer. We're most of the time working B2B. We have a jewelry, like a gold brand that sells to a jewelry company, and this is our first B2C story. But like with the tuna, I want to know how much mercury is in my tuna. Actually, this stresses me out when I'm buying tuna that they don't have the right labeling, and I'm like, where is this tuna from? Is it from a farm or is it wild? So I think we do see customers demanding that. Unfortunately, it's kind of overstated how much customers are demanding this. On paper, they say they want sustainability. The reality is they're seemingly not always willing to pay for it. So we still have a few cultural shifts to take place there, but yeah, those are the biggest hurdles from our side, at least.
Thank you, Ella. Yeah, I just conscious of the time as well. I know we have about 11 minutes until it's going to have a hard stop, and some of the points you raised brings to mind for me equity and ethics and values. You talk about mindset shift and habits, and as we all know, right, technology can scale injustice just as easily as it can solve it. So I was just wondering, how do you ensure that your solutions don't leave small producers behind, don't have a negative impact on vulnerable communities? Can we build for equity and not just efficiency? What's your thoughts on that, Dan?
Yeah, I think it's all about transparency. It's all about, and this is actually where blockchain comes in. It's about putting things out on a public ledger that can be audited by anybody. Of course, it's also about proper data collection and transparency in data collection, like what Ella said. This is a big problem that then can translate into disparities, because there are going to be actors going to take advantage of that, because they'll have access that the producer won't, and then they're going to say, well, you know what, I got this thing on you, I can fix it for you, but it's going to cost you an X amount of money, and you can't go to anybody else. And so that's a problem, right? But if you put it on a ledger, if you put it in a public ledger, if you create transparency within the entire process, then that solves quite a bit of this, because there's also a place for the middlemen to work if you use this process. But the gatekeeping the gatekeeping money machine kind of disappears. And so they actually have to say, well, actually, you know what? I am a broker, so I need to broker stuff. I'm not, I can't I can't extort money out of people anymore, and that's what really happens in a lot of these developing economies. Instead of brokering, it's actually extortion, which can be mitigated by these transparent technologies. Again, another thing is proper data collection, auditable data collection. Again, what Ella said, this is something that actually, as I was saying before, my co-founder is doing right now in Zambia. He's in Zambia right now working with honey producers over there, and he is literally collecting data. We're going to onboard about 2,000 honey producers from Zambia onto Palmyra Pro, and it's literally, that's what he's doing there. He's conducting workshops with them. He already spent a bunch of time virtually with them, and now he's on the ground with them doing this work. And that's actually commodities work. I mean, that's what you do. You don't spend it in some office crunching numbers. You do it under the baobab tree, talking to the villagers that produce the commodity. That's how the impact is made. That's how change is made. So yeah, you can't always, to just kind of wrap it up, you can't always, that's never going to be 100%. There's going to be always somebody trying to find a loophole to screw somebody else over. Okay. That's just human nature. But what we can do is we can provide more and more and more technology and more transparency through technology to make it harder and harder and harder to do so. And that's why we're so bullish on blockchain technology, because it provides that, and they don't have to trust us. They just trust the data, and all we have to do is show that the data was gathered in an auditable, transparent way. What you do with the data is up to you, and then it'll work itself out. It's the same thing that happens today with information and the way access to information happens. There's a lot more information out there. It's a lot harder to get away with stuff because there's just so many, eyes on you, digital eyes on you that can capture all this stuff and expose it. So yeah, that's really the solution, and it'll take time. It's about culture. It's about, like, say, for example, in Japan, they do stuff on paper, but that's a culture. And what Mark was saying, it's really about just the consumer, the market deciding what it wants. Okay. And what I say to, whenever we have these conversations, well, why does it matter? They don't care until they care. That's what I always say. They don't care until they care, and then everybody cares. And you just have to be ready for that. So that's my view on it.
Thank you, Dan. And just touching on what you said about the market and what people care about, and if we zoom out to the macro level and look ahead, we've got AI transforming industries, planetary boundaries being overshot, geopolitics reshaping supply routes. Mark, where do you see this space going in the next 5 years? 2030 is often a year that's thrown out there as a year to achieve goals by, and as a species, are we there?
Conveniently, how sometimes it gets kicked to 2050. It's like, that's not the goal. Even if you artificially change it, it's not going to change the way the world's going to react. Honestly, the way I see this evolving is really consolidation based on standardization. There's a reason why mobile technology became the fastest adopted in history by a long shot. It's because you could send messages from one phone company to another without needing to ask them, what system do you use? Like, if I had to ask you what email client you're using in order to send you data or an email, that would not function. Today, proprietary systems that are built on whatever buzzword or kind of phony method of saying that they're open and inclusive, when in actuality they're proprietary, and how they share and receive data will fall apart. Every innovation in pretty much history has followed that path, where the legacy proprietary providers end up falling by the wayside because standardization enables better, faster, cheaper. And so I think that's the way it's going to go. I think AI, remote sensing, satellite technology, imaging, et cetera, is going to integrate with traceability at a product level. Without integration at a product level, laundering in the middle of the supply chain is still going to happen. Chain of custody is insufficient without event-based traceability at a product level because you can't see what's happening. And so incidents of verifying a deforestation claim at a birth farm where the cattle is then swapped in the middle of the supply chain, brought to a satellite monitored farm for a weekend and claimed as deforestation free. Similar laundering happens in many different supply chains. That's just one example. Yeah, I think that's the future where it's going to go, is to the standardization and integration to improve the fidelity and credibility of the claims in the supply chain. That will then inform the end buyers to be able to take action through the supply chains, and then from the primary producers to also sell through more responsibly for their own best interests. There's a payments element to this, but I'll just go down an entire rabbit hole there on banking and what have you, and want to leave time for at least one question.
Thank you, Mark. Yeah, we've got a few questions in our audience that have been shared in the chat here. Perhaps Sandeep, you could help with bringing it on screen. Perhaps you could go to the next one. I see. Yeah. What does the panel think of this?
I can jump in on that. Yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, I think so. We're not a certifying body ourselves, right? We're like basically a tech platform that enables the transfer of this information, and we actually let third-party certifiers. We work with them on the ground for chain of custody due diligence, and for instance, in Africa, and we grant them third-party access to the product passports if our clients want that, to basically audit the information in the product passports. So I think we work very much hand in hand with certification agencies. I don't know about the other guys. And yes, we do see a lot of certifications on products in Europe, because Europe is a very well-regulated market in that regard. And I think, for instance, in cosmetics, we know in Europe, anything you put on your face has actually been tested and doesn't have a lot of chemicals in it, unlike perhaps in the US. So in general, I think this is to protect consumers. We can debate whether that sometimes goes too far, perhaps in AI or other elements, but maybe a conversation for another day.
We also integrate with certifiers with whole chain. We actually collaborate quite closely with them. We built certifiers. We partnered on with Global Seafood Alliance to enable their PRISM platform. They promulgate the best aquaculture practice, seafood processing standard, responsible fishing vessel standard. So we integrate with certifications seamlessly, for sure.
That's great to hear. I guess that's leading to how certifications can be worth more than the paper they're on. Like a lot of criticism around how certifications haven't necessarily led to the kind of outcomes we want over the years. And yeah, seeing where those gaps can be filled. Thank you to all of you that have been part of this mission. It's definitely a critical one. And just as we approach time, just love to share a few thoughts before we depart and continue the discussions offline. Thank you, Ella, Mark, and Dan. What you shared today is powerful and it's inspiring. Your efforts are helping to drive positive change where it's most needed. All right. We're not here to pitch perfect solutions, and we're here to build better systems together. And as we've heard, blockchain can help us build more just, transparent, and resilient supply chains, but only if we do the work, whether it's under the baobab tree, as you put it, Dan. And I want to end with a quote from a friend, professor and journalist Gary Young. Racism, cynicism, and intolerance are on the rise. Wages stagnant, and faith that progressive change is possible declining, even as resistance grows. Things look bleak. The propensity to despair is strong, but should not be indulged. Sing yourself up. Imagine a world in which you might thrive, for which there is no evidence, and then fight for it. And all of you guys have been fighting for it, where evidence hasn't been made displayed or transparent. You're casting a light on it, and I think this is part of that global movement where we will see a better world. And yeah, to everyone tuning in, stay curious, stay connected, keep building for real world change. Thank you all of you for your time. Thank you for your energy. Peace and love, all of you.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
all. Yeah, great to meet you guys. Bye.